I want to start with a story. Years ago, I snapped at my daughter over something ridiculous. She was just being a kid. And as soon as the words left my mouth, I felt it. That sinking, gut churning, I'm a terrible parent feeling. Now, let's pause. What was that? Was it guilt or was it shame? Let's start here. Shame and guilt are not the same. We use those words interchangeably all the time, especially in everyday conversation. Oh, I felt so guilty, or I'm ashamed of myself. But they are profoundly different emotions. And the way they operate in our lives, night and day. One erodes our sense of self, the other can reinforce it. And when we don't know the difference, we give shame more power than it deserves. Shame is deeply tied to identity. It says, I am bad, I am wrong, I'm broken. It's not about behavior. It's about who we believe we are at our core. And that belief, that internal narrative, it shapes everything. How we show up in relationships, how we set boundaries, how we handle failure. Shame doesn't say you made a mistake. It says you are the mistake. And when that voice gets loud enough, when it starts to echo in the chambers of our thoughts, it can become the lens through which we see the world. Guilt, on the other hand, is about behavior. It says, I did something that doesn't align with my values. That's the crucial difference. Guilt is tethered to our internal moral compass. It reminds us that we're capable of reflection and responsibility. When you feel guilt, it doesn't mean you're a bad person. It means you're a person who cares. You care enough to recognize when something you've done doesn't reflect who you want to be. That's powerful. That's where accountability lives. Here's a real example. Let's say you forgot your best friend's birthday. If your inner voice says, I'm such a terrible friend, I never get it right, I'm always letting people down, that's shame talking. Shame isn't interested in growth. It's interested in keeping you small. Now, if instead you say, that was a really thoughtless mistake, I need to reach out, own it, and make it right, that's guilt. Guilt is uncomfortable, but it's productive. It motivates connection and repair. Shame motivates hiding and isolation. One of the most dangerous things about shame is how silent it is. Most of us don't walk around saying, I feel shame right now. It shows up in body language, in our posture, in the way we apologize for our own existence. It shows up as perfectionism, as people-pleasing, as numbing behaviors. Scrolling, eating, working, drinking. Shame tells us we have to hustle for our worth. Guilt doesn't ask us to prove anything. It just asks us to own what's ours and do better next time. When I first started studying shame, what I found was this. People who have the highest levels of resilience, joy, and connection aren't people who don't feel shame. They're people who can recognize it and name it. They have language. They know the difference between I made a mistake and I am a mistake. That clarity gives them power, because when we can name what we're feeling, we can move through it. But when we collapse shame and guilt into the same experience, we lose the opportunity for growth. We get stuck in the mud of self-loathing instead of stepping into the discomfort of accountability. There's also a social element to this. Shame is often reinforced by culture, by families, communities, workplaces. We're taught from a young age that being good means being perfect. And when we fall short, which we all do, shame steps in to say, see, you're not lovable. You're not enough. That's a lie. But it's a lie that's repeated so often we start to believe it's the truth. Guilt, though, It doesn't question our worth. It calls us back to our values. It doesn't say, you're not good enough. It says, that wasn't in line with who you want to be. Let's get back to center. So when we understand that shame is about identity and guilt is about behavior, we open the door to healing. We begin to separate who we are from what we do. And that separation, that's where compassion lives. That's where change becomes possible. Because the truth is, we are all imperfect. We all mess up, but we are still worthy of love and belonging. Shame says we aren't. Guilt says we can do better. And that difference, that tiny difference, is what shapes the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and who we're allowed to become. Shame is like mold. It grows in the dark. It thrives in silence, secrecy, and judgment. The less we talk about it, the more power it gains. I've seen this time and time again, not just in the research, but in my own life and the lives of the thousands of people who've shared their stories with me. When we don't name shame, it festers. It becomes that ever-present hum in the background of our lives, telling us we're not enough, we're not lovable, we're not worthy, and when no one is talking about it, we assume it's just us. That's how shame works. It convinces us we're alone in our struggles, and that isolation reinforces the shame. The silence surrounding shame is rarely chosen. It's inherited. We learn from a young age what's safe to talk about and what needs to be hidden. Maybe you were taught, we don't talk about things like that, or keep your voice down, or if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. These messages, even when well-intentioned, create a framework of emotional secrecy. So instead of saying, I feel ashamed, we say, I'm fine. Instead of reaching out for help, we pull back and armor up. And every time we do, shame gets a little louder. Shame also loves judgment, not just judgment from others, though that's a huge part of it, but self-judgment, that inner critic, the one that says, you're such a screw up, or why can't you just get it together? That voice is shame's megaphone. The harsher we are with ourselves, the easier it is for shame to set up camp in our hearts. And when other people judge us, especially when we're vulnerable, especially when we're trying to show up as our authentic selves, it reinforces the message that we have to hide parts of who we are to be accepted. Judgment tells us, don't be too much, don't be too real, don't be you, and so we shrink. The tricky thing about shame is that it convinces us to protect it. It whispers, if you tell someone, they'll think less of you. If you open up, they'll walk away. Shame turns vulnerability into a threat. It tells us that the very thing that could heal us, connection, is the thing that will destroy us. And so we stay quiet. We carry the weight of shame in secret, hoping it will go away on its own. But here's the truth. Shame only grows stronger in the dark. The only way to weaken it is to bring it into the light. When we speak shame, when we name it and own it, it starts to unravel. The moment we say, I'm feeling ashamed, especially to someone who meets us with empathy, we interrupt shame's cycle. We take away its oxygen. And no, it's not easy. Vulnerability never is. But every time we choose to speak rather than silence ourselves, every time we choose courage over comfort, we chip away at shame's grip on our lives. Because vulnerability is not weakness, it's the path back to each other. And shame cannot survive empathy. That's not poetic, it's scientific. I've had people tell me that sharing their shame was the scariest thing they've ever done and the most freeing. I've sat across from CEOs, teachers, parents, trauma survivors, and heard stories that have never been spoken aloud. And every single time, something happens when those words are released. Shoulders relax, breathing slows, eyes soften, not because shame disappears overnight, but because for the first time, it's not carrying the weight alone. And that's the beginning of healing. So if we want to break shame's grip, we have to stop keeping it a secret. We have to speak it. We have to create spaces in our families, our classrooms, our workplaces, where people are allowed to say, I'm struggling, without fear of judgment. We have to show up for one another, not with advice, but with presence, not with solutions, but with empathy. And most of all, we have to be brave enough to start with ourselves, to look at our own shame stories and say, this isn't who I am. This is something I've carried, and I'm ready to let it go. That's how we dismantle shame, not with silence, but with truth. Guilt is often misunderstood. We hear the word guilt, and we think of something heavy, something negative, something that we'd rather avoid. But guilt, when understood correctly, can be one of the most powerful forces for personal growth and change. It's uncomfortable, yes, but discomfort doesn't always mean something is bad or wrong. Sometimes it's a signal, a red flag, that's telling us to pause, reflect, and course correct. It's guilt, not shame, that keeps us aligned with our values, reminds us of who we want to be, and pushes us to grow. The difference between guilt and shame is subtle but vital. While shame tells us, I am bad, guilt says, I did something bad. There's a world of difference in those two statements. Guilt doesn't attack our identity. It holds us accountable for our actions. It reminds us that we have the power to choose differently next time. It's an emotion that leads us back to our core values. And when we are in touch with those values, when we act in alignment with them, guilt serves as a compass guiding us back to our best selves. Guilt helps us reflect on our behavior and acknowledge that we've missed the mark, but it also offers us the opportunity to correct it and move forward. Think about the times you felt guilt. It might have been when you lied to a friend, didn't follow through on a commitment, or acted in a way that wasn't congruent with who you know yourself to be. The feeling of guilt is uncomfortable, but it's also an invitation. It's saying, that doesn't feel right, let's do better. It's not saying, you're a terrible person. That's what shame says. Guilt is telling you, you're better than this. You can make amends. You can learn from this. And that in itself is a gift. It's a signal that we still care. We still care enough to want to do better. What's fascinating is that guilt can actually fuel change in a way that shame never can. When we feel guilty, we want to repair the damage. We want to fix what we've broken. And that drive toward repair, that's what leads to growth. Guilt forces us to examine our behavior, to take ownership of our actions, and to consider how we can show up in a more authentic way. It's uncomfortable, but it's productive discomfort. It moves us toward greater alignment with our values, greater understanding of ourselves, and a deeper connection with others. Guilt is action-oriented. It asks us to take responsibility, apologize, and make amends. It holds us accountable in a way that propels us forward. Now, it's important to note that guilt only works as a motivator when it's acknowledged and processed healthily. If we bury guilt or allow it to transform into shame, it loses its transformative power. Instead of using guilt as a tool for change, we get stuck in the loop of self-blame, self-criticism, and self-punishment. When we allow guilt to turn into shame, it paralyzes us. It tells us that we're incapable of change, that we are fundamentally flawed. But when we allow guilt to motivate us, it becomes a force that pushes us toward growth. It says, you can do better. You can make it right. You're still worthy of love even when you've made mistakes. The reason guilt is so powerful is because it keeps us connected to our values. It's like a small voice reminding us of who we really are. Think about it. What is the thing that causes you to feel guilty? It's usually something that doesn't align with the person you want to be. Maybe you've acted in a way that goes against your values of honesty, kindness, or integrity. That feeling of guilt is an indicator that you care about being a person of good character. It's proof that you're still in touch with the values that guide you. And that's why guilt is ultimately constructive. It's a signal that we haven't completely disconnected from our core moral compass. It's a reminder that we can do better. It's also worth noting that guilt's power comes from its connection to empathy. When we feel guilt, we are often aware that our actions have hurt someone else. That awareness prompts us to reach out, to apologize, to make amends, and to show compassion. Guilt doesn't isolate us. It calls us into deeper connection. It's a reminder that we are all interconnected, that our actions impact those around us. And while guilt might feel uncomfortable, it also gives us the opportunity to repair broken relationships, to show up as our best selves, and to make things right. In many ways, guilt is a form of emotional resilience. It forces us to confront our mistakes, to learn from them, and to grow stronger. It pushes us to face the discomfort of having hurt someone or acted out of alignment with our values, but it also provides the motivation to repair, reconnect, and grow. Unlike shame, which keeps us stuck in a cycle of self-loathing, guilt moves us toward action. It's uncomfortable but productive, and that's why it's such a vital tool in our emotional toolkit. When we embrace guilt as a motivator for growth, we give ourselves permission to be imperfect, to make mistakes, learn from them, and emerge more compassionate and more aligned with our values. Shame is incredibly powerful because it doesn't just make us feel bad, it makes us believe that we are bad. And when we start to believe that, we begin to act in ways that are self-destructive. It's a dangerous cycle. Shame convinces us that we're unworthy of love, that we're unworthy of success, that we're unworthy of connection. This belief leads us to engage in behaviors that reinforce the shame we feel. We hide, we isolate, we numb ourselves, and we self-sabotage. Shame tells us that we are broken, and the longer we hold on to that belief, the more our actions mirror that belief. When we think we are unworthy, we start to act like it. This is why shame is often linked to self-destructive behaviors, because it pushes us to disconnect from our true selves and from others. One of the most insidious ways shame shows up is through perfectionism. Perfectionism is often rooted in shame. It's the belief that if we can just get everything perfect, then we'll be worthy of love and acceptance. But the truth is, perfectionism never leads to satisfaction. It leads to exhaustion, anxiety, and a constant feeling of falling short. When we believe that we need to be perfect to be worthy, we set ourselves up for failure. And when we inevitably fall short, because we all do, shame steps in and reinforces the idea that we are not enough. The cycle continues. Perfectionism at its core is self-destructive because it's built on a foundation of shame. It's the belief that we must protect ourselves from rejection by being flawless. And that belief is a trap. Another way shame manifests in self-destructive behaviors is through people-pleasing. People-pleasing comes from a deep desire to be liked, to avoid conflict, and to keep people close. But at the heart of people-pleasing is the belief that we need to earn our worth by constantly giving of ourselves. We suppress our own needs, desires, and boundaries in the hopes that others will accept and love us. And yet, this is a perfect recipe for burnout, resentment, and disconnection. People-pleasing keeps us stuck in a cycle of seeking validation from others while sacrificing our own well-being. And the more we give away our sense of self, the more shame whispers, "You're not worthy unless you make everyone else happy." This is the damaging power of shame. It convinces us to lose ourselves in the service of others, ultimately leaving us drained and unfulfilled. Shame can also show up as addiction, whether that's through alcohol, drugs, food, work, or any other numbing behavior. Addiction is a desperate attempt to escape the pain of feeling unworthy or flawed. It's a way of coping with the overwhelming emotions that shame triggers. People who are struggling with shame often turn to substances or behaviors that numb the pain, because facing the reality of their own shame feels unbearable. The temporary relief that addiction provides only deepens the cycle. It provides a brief escape, but when the numbness wears off, the shame returns, often more intensely than before. This is the self-perpetuating nature of shame. It keeps us trapped in unhealthy cycles of behavior, all while reinforcing the belief that we are not enough. In contrast, guilt is linked to accountability. Guilt doesn't tell us that we're bad. It tells us that we've done something that doesn't align with who we want to be. And because guilt is behavior focused rather than identity focused, it has the power to drive positive change. When we feel guilt, we don't spiral into self-loathing. Instead, we feel compelled to correct the behavior, to apologize, to make amends. Guilt calls us to take responsibility for our actions, to own up to our mistakes, and to learn from them. It's an invitation to repair and reconnect, rather than to retreat and isolate. Where shame isolates, guilt connects. It brings us into relationship with others through accountability and repair. It asks us to own our actions and their impact, and to make things right where possible. Guilt, unlike shame, does not drive us to destructive behaviors. Instead, it drives us toward growth and accountability. When we feel guilty, we're not hiding from our mistakes. We're confronting them head on. We understand that what we've done does not define who we are. We can recognize that our behavior doesn't reflect our core values, and from that recognition comes the opportunity for change. When we feel guilt, we're motivated to do better next time. We are given the opportunity to restore relationships, rebuild trust, and show up in more authentic, compassionate ways. Guilt doesn't ask us to beat ourselves up. It asks us to do better. What's more, guilt helps us build resilience. It teaches us how to face our mistakes with courage and humility instead of running from the discomfort of having hurt someone or acted out of alignment with our values. Guilt invites us to confront that discomfort and take action. It pushes us to take responsibility, to apologize when necessary, and to make things right. This is how we grow. This is how we learn. This is how we build stronger relationships with ourselves and others. Unlike shame, which keeps us stuck in a cycle of self-doubt and despair, guilt can be a powerful motivator for positive change because it focuses on what we can do differently, not on who we are or what we're lacking. So while shame can keep us trapped in a spiral of self-destruction, guilt can propel us toward healing and growth. Guilt doesn't paralyze us. It activates us. It gives us the courage to take accountability and to move forward. Even when we've made mistakes, the key is to recognize the difference between guilt and shame and to understand that guilt, when processed healthily, is not something to fear. It's something to embrace. Guilt is the emotion that helps us grow, while shame keeps us stuck in patterns that are harmful to ourselves and others. And that ultimately is the gift of guilt. It can help us stay accountable to who we want to be and how we want to show up in the world. Shame is a powerful force, but it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It requires certain conditions to thrive, and those conditions are secrecy, silence, and judgment. These are the breeding grounds where shame grows, where it becomes a silent but pervasive force in our lives. It's easy to think of shame as something that simply exists within us, a feeling that bubbles up out of nowhere. But the truth is, shame is something we nurture, often without even realizing it, through our behavior and our silence. The more we hide it, the more it grows. When we hide our shame, when we keep it in the dark, it gains strength. Secrecy is one of the most powerful contributors to the growth of shame. We all have parts of ourselves we don't want others to see, mistakes, flaws, failures, or things we're ashamed of. We believe that if others knew these things about us, they wouldn't love us, accept us, or see us as worthy. So we hide them. We push them down and lock them away, hoping no one will discover our vulnerabilities. The problem is that the longer we keep our shame hidden, the more power it has over us. Secrecy makes us believe that we are the only ones who struggle, that we are the only ones with imperfections. It isolates us from others and makes us feel as though we are unworthy of connection. The truth is, secrecy is a toxic companion to shame. It keeps us stuck. Silence works hand in hand with secrecy. When we don't talk about what's bothering us, when we don't speak the truth of our struggles, we allow shame to grow unchecked. Shame thrives when it goes unspoken. It's the quiet whispers in our mind that tell us we're not good enough, that we don't belong, that we're unlovable. The silence surrounding shame often comes from a deep fear that if we speak our truth, others will judge us or reject us. So we stay silent, hoping that the shame will eventually fade on its own. But the silence only deepens the shame's grip on us. When we don't talk about our pain, our vulnerabilities, or our mistakes, we begin to believe that those parts of us are not worth sharing, that they are too ugly, too messy to be seen. Silence doesn't heal shame, it perpetuates it. Judgment is the third condition that shame needs to grow. Judgment, whether it's from others or from ourselves, feeds shame's narrative. Judgment says, you are not enough. You don't measure up. You are less than. When we judge ourselves, we reinforce the belief that we are broken, that we are unworthy of love, belonging, or success. And when others judge us, it deepens that belief even further. Judgment is the voice that tells us that our worth is contingent on meeting certain standards, on being perfect. It makes us feel that we are not allowed to be our authentic selves, that we must hide our flaws and imperfections in order to be accepted. Shame grows in judgment because judgment makes us feel that we are wrong at our core. It tells us that we are unacceptable, that we should be ashamed of who we are. What's particularly damaging about judgment is that it often happens in places where we should feel safe, in our families, our communities, and our workplaces. It's easy to point to external sources of judgment, but often the harshest judgments we face come from within. We are our own worst critics. We internalize the messages that society, our parents, or our peers have given us about what it means to be worthy, successful, or loved. And we apply those standards to ourselves even when they don't align with our values or our truths. Judgment tells us that we must be perfect in order to be loved, that we must meet certain expectations in order to belong. And when we fail to meet those standards, shame tells us that we are not enough, that we have failed, that we are unworthy of connection. The antidote to secrecy, silence, and judgment is vulnerability. Vulnerability is the opposite of hiding, silence, and self-judgment. Vulnerability allows us to say, this is who I am, imperfections and all, and to show up authentically in the world. It's the courage to speak about our struggles, to acknowledge our pain, and to share our flaws without fear of rejection. When we are vulnerable, we invite others to see us as we are, not as the version we think they want to see, but as the full, messy human beings we truly are. And when we let others see our vulnerabilities, we create space for connection. We remind ourselves and others that we are not alone in our struggles. We are all imperfect, and that's what makes us human. It's important to recognize that vulnerability doesn't mean oversharing or laying bare every detail of our lives. It means choosing to be honest, to be real, to show up with courage and authenticity. Vulnerability means embracing the discomfort of being seen, of showing our true selves, even when we're not sure how others will respond. Vulnerability is the antidote to shame because it breaks the silence. It shatters the secrecy that keeps us isolated. It defies the judgment that tells us we're not enough. And when we choose vulnerability, we create a space where shame cannot thrive. We allow ourselves to be seen, and in doing so, we reclaim our worth. When we break the silence and speak our truth, we reduce shame's power over us. We begin to see that we are not alone in our struggles, that everyone has their own battles, their own imperfections, their own shame. And in that space of shared humanity, we find connection. We find understanding. We find empathy. When we stop hiding, when we stop staying silent, and when we stop judging ourselves and others, shame loses its grip. We are able to show up more fully, more authentically, and more compassionately, both with ourselves and with those around us. Shame is one of the most universal human experiences. It doesn't discriminate. It touches all of us, whether we're wealthy or poor, successful or struggling, young or old. We all experience shame at some point in our lives. It's a part of the human condition. But even though it's universal, shame is something we often feel we need to hide, something we feel we need to deal with alone. We believe that if others knew about our shame, they would think less of us, reject us, or see us as unworthy. So we isolate ourselves, convinced that we are the only ones who are struggling with these feelings of inadequacy, unworthiness, and failure. The truth, however, is that everyone experiences shame. It doesn't matter who you are or where you come from. At some point, you will face the deep, painful emotion that makes you feel like you don't belong, like you're not enough. And it's that very universality that makes shame so powerful. We think we're alone in it, but we're not. In fact, the more we try to hide our shame, the more we reinforce the idea that we're the only ones feeling it. The irony is that the very thing that keeps us disconnected from others, our shame, actually connects us in the most profound ways. We're all in this together. One of the most common reasons people feel isolated by their shame is that they believe their shame is unique, that they're the only ones who feel this way. Maybe it's the shame of not living up to societal expectations. the shame of not being able to meet the demands of work or family, or the shame of being found out for not being perfect. We believe that everyone else has it together, that everyone else is successful, happy, and confident, while we're struggling, failing, or feeling like frauds. But the truth is, no one has it all together. Everyone has their own struggles with shame. The people you admire, the people who seem to have it all figured out, they felt it too. They just don't talk about it because they too are hiding their shame behind masks of perfection and success. The more we keep our shame hidden, the more it grows. It convinces us that we are alone, that no one would understand if we shared what we were feeling. And that's what makes shame so toxic. It convinces us that we are unworthy of connection. But when we allow ourselves to share our stories, to open up about our shame, we begin to break down the walls that divide us. We start to see that we're not the only ones who have felt what we're feeling. And in that moment of shared vulnerability, we realize that we are not alone. There's a profound sense of connection that comes from recognizing that others have walked similar paths and felt similar pain. And when we connect with others in this way, we find healing. It's not just other people who experience shame, it's also a part of the collective human experience. If we look at the world around us, we can see how shame is often woven into the fabric of our societies, cultures, and institutions. Societal norms, expectations, and cultural standards can trigger deep feelings of shame, particularly when individuals feel like they don't measure up. Whether it's the pressure to look a certain way, to be successful by traditional standards, or to fit into narrow definitions of gender or identity, shame is often used as a tool to control and conform. But it's important to recognize that these societal pressures aren't the source of our true worth. Our worth comes from within, and the more we recognize our shared humanity, the more we can begin to reject these external standards and embrace our authenticity. What's most liberating about understanding that shame is universal is the realization that we don't have to go through it alone. We don't have to hide. We don't have to suffer in silence. The very act of sharing our shame with others, whether with close friends, a therapist, or even a community, can help release its grip on us. It's only when we allow ourselves to be seen, to expose our vulnerabilities, that we begin to heal. Shame loses its power when we step out of isolation and into connection. When we say, I am not the only one who feels this way, we begin to feel lighter. We begin to see that our worth isn't contingent on perfection or on meeting external standards. It's inherent in our humanity. But what we need to remember is that our shared humanity is what makes us resilient. It's the understanding that we all experience shame in some form, that no one is exempt, that makes it possible to move through it. When we begin to speak openly about our shame, we not only free ourselves, but also create the conditions for others to do the same. Shame thrives in secrecy, but it dissolves in the light of vulnerability and connection. We can use our shared experiences to create communities that are built on empathy, understanding, and acceptance, rather than judgment and perfection. When we come together and admit that we've all been there, that we've all felt like we're not enough, we pave the way for collective healing. As painful as it is, the universality of shame can be a powerful tool for growth and connection. It's when we recognize that shame is not something that belongs to us alone that we can begin to let go of its grip. When we stop seeing shame as something that isolates us and instead see it as something that binds us together, we open the door to real healing. We open the door to compassion, both for ourselves and for others. Understanding that shame is universal is the first step toward releasing it. It's the beginning of creating a world where we no longer hide behind masks of perfection, but instead show up as our true imperfect selves together. So, when we understand the universality of shame, when we recognize that it's something every single one of us experiences, something shifts. We begin to let go of the idea that we're unworthy or flawed for feeling the way we do. We stop hiding. We stop pretending that we're immune to the feelings of inadequacy, fear, and unworthiness that shame brings. Instead, we start to embrace our shared humanity. We remember that we are not alone in this struggle. We find strength in knowing that vulnerability is the key to healing, that connection is the antidote to shame. The beauty of all of this is that by simply sharing our stories, by acknowledging our imperfections and our vulnerabilities, we not only heal ourselves, but we also give others the permission to do the same. We break down the walls that divide us. We create spaces where shame can no longer thrive. We learn that our worth is not defined by our mistakes, our flaws, or our failures. Our worth is inherent in our humanity. And when we show up authentically in all of our messy, imperfect glory, we invite others to do the same. This is how we change the world. Not by striving for perfection, but by embracing our imperfections. Not by hiding, but by showing up, vulnerable and courageous. This is how we heal, how we grow, and how we connect. Shame may be universal, but so is the capacity for love, empathy, and belonging. And when we lean into that truth, there's nothing we can't overcome together.